Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the wonderful world of Spoiler Warning, where we talk wrestling news. My name is Tom Colohue, and I am covering the deep dives and the ever so slightly shallow dives of WWE wrestling news, as well as occasionally a dive into AEW, and immediately a positive as we start. Thank you very much, Michael, for renewing your subscription for a record 32nd month. You are literally my metronome, telling me exactly how long I've been doing this. Thank you kindly, Michael. I do appreciate it. We have plenty of people in the chat already saying hi, welcome everyone. We have 5 major headlines today. Firstly, Triple H beating Vince out of the WWE, and how much of that we already know and have already covered, but there's more details to share. Logan Paul and the possibility of a United States Championship and why they might be booking it that way. Jade Cargill plans for the future, Raw, SmackDown, NXT or undecided. A top heel in the company, so much so that he eclipses the people on the wrong brand and had to be drafted over. A little bit more on Kevin Owens as well, because it's not about him. And The Rock, with news that we've already heard once again here, but we'll dive a little deeper into it. What I like to do with reports like this, when it comes to The Rock, etc., and anyone like that, is get a little bit more detail ready for the second that someone else starts reporting it and it suddenly goes everywhere. So it's nice to share a little bit more. We have 41 people here and 22 likes on the YouTube side. Please do remember to hit your likes. We only need 10 more in the next 3 minutes to hit a new record. Firstly, hello everyone on the YouTube side. Brad, Zane, Daniela, Bailey, Daz, NYC, Roger, Carmelina, Rob and Dave. Welcome everyone. Lovely to see you. And of course on the Twitch side as well, we have Spider Boss. We have Bailey on both sides. Nice to see. And of course we have Michael as well. So let's dive into some of the questions and, of course, as you know, some of the news as we get to it. So let's start off with Spider-Boss. He says, why did Kevin Owens get traded to SmackDown? Kevin Owens was traded to SmackDown because they felt the need for another top-level face. They wanted to refresh the opponent against Roman Reigns, and it does seem to be tradition now for him to be the Royal Rumble opponent for Roman. That said, they do believe they did everything they possibly could with the combination of Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, and just needed to balance things out a little better, with Jey Uso going the other way. It's someone who can still work refreshingly with Austin Theory, Bobby Lashley, and the like. To my knowledge, and here's a exclusive for you and a spoiler, Kevin Owens was not aware of the change until very, very late in the day, and he was not believed to be particularly happy about it. Bailey says, too many people writing about The Rock at WrestleMania when Spoiler Warning addressed this months ago. Brad says, been trying to get people interested in Spoiler Warning through Twitter, but Tom knows that. I do indeed. Thank you very much for putting me over, Brad. Yeah, everyone is now on board about The Rock not being at Mania this year. It's funny that, isn't it? It's funny how often this happens. But still no credit to Tom. Yeah, I don't expect credit anymore. I gave up on that. I do the best for the people here. You guys are what's important for me. Dad says, big up Tom, much new tonight. Indeed. Brad says, looks like new stuff about the new leadership telling Vince to stay out of creative. That's a big win for all of us. Spider-Boss says, personally I see Roman versus Solo Sikoa mainly for seeing someone new against Roman. Doesn't necessarily mean, unfortunately, that we will be getting new. Michael says, hi Tom, welcome. And Spider-Boss says, a lot of news with Vince involved all over it. Indeed, and plenty about it. NYC Orton is apparently, according to Fightful Select, coming back before Survivor Series. If you want to know more about Randy Orton, where he's been, what his plans were, when creative started putting together some storylines for him, was a couple of weeks ago, check out this channel and the video section where you'll see more on Randy Orton. There's also a recent video about why Randy Orton has taken so long to come back. It's literally, the thumbnail says, Randy Orton return blocked. You'll be interested in it. Carmelina says hi. Rob and Dave says, hey Tom, how are you doing? Doing very well, thank you. Rob and Dave, nice to see you. Dad says, any news on AEW regarding RVD? None whatsoever. He has made appearances previously, but there's nothing actual contractual to basically secure him there. Spider-Boss says, Sports Illustrated reported there wasn't plans to have Roman versus The Rock at WrestleMania 40. True, and Spoiler Warning reported that quite a while before. Good evening, Chris. Nice to see you. Carmelina says, are Solo and Jimmy going after Jay and Cody? Yes, they are. That is the plan that will get them to Cody versus Roman again. Ryan says, morning, mate. Morning, Ryan. Nice to see you. Peter Roberts says, hey, Tom. Hello, Peter. And Razar says, hi, Tom. You're always ahead of the curve on news. It seems like people pick up things you report weeks or even months after you. I certainly have recognised some of that, Razar. A lot of people bring that to my attention, which I very much retain. Bear with me 1 second. do apologise for that. Yes, that does seem to happen. Certainly behind paywalls, a lot of my news starts to appear. There is one guy who's constantly, in many ways, very positive, but always tags Christoph Wrestling Informer in, who has literally just taken things that I've reported and claimed them as his own and got thousands upon thousands of views for them. So, not the biggest fan of some people who tend to do that, but at the same time, you guys are the ones who benefit because you're the only ones who know. Daniela says the Cody and Roman face-to-face on SmackDown was absolutely fire, so good. Cody needs to dethrone Roman at WrestleMania 40. Well, I thought he was going to do it at 39, but here we are. Pete says, yay, Tom is on at 10. Evening all. Hope you all had a good weekend. Yeah, thanks for bringing that to my attention, Pete. Can anyone tell me if they had this same problem where the go live for this show said going live at 9 instead of 10? Or if you're in the US, 4 instead of 5 Eastern time. Was it out of sync with what actually happened? Because mine said 10, but Pete's 100% said 9. Backwards says, hey Tom, what do you think of Nick Aldis becoming SmackDown GM? He is a great talker. I'm sure he'll come back to the wrestling when he's ready, and I do think it was intentional that we had the image of Roman, Cody, and Nick Aldis in the middle blocking Cody. There is a history there, and I advise people to check it out if they've not already had a look. So, Nick Aldis, I'm excited for when he gets back into the ring. It'll be a little while before that happens, I'm sure. Hello, Vegeta. Nice to see you. Ryan says, knew The Rock wouldn't happen, but had that little bit of hope that he would appear at Chamber in Australia. That was not going to happen, but I get why you were hopeful of that yourself. Eddie says, you have anything on new signs or returns? Not at this point in time, but I've been ahead on a little bit of those. At the moment, my headlines are Triple H versus Vince McMahon and the big victory. Logan Paul and the United States Championship. Plans for Jade Cargill early on, a top heel so impressive when it comes to garnering heat that they took over the wrong show, and of course a little bit on The Rock. We've already talked about Kevin Owens. Spider-Boss really going full Rock for spoiler warning. Bailey says a nice touch for Kevin Owens when he appeared at SmackDown, looked backward as a nod to when Sami Zayn's music would then follow him. This time Sami wasn't there. Yeah, as I say, not something he was fully behind. Chris says it wouldn't surprise me if we saw Orton return on tonight's edition of Raw. It surprised me. NYC said, did you see Umino match? I have not seen the Umino match. I have not got around to watching Royal Quest yet. I assume that's what you're referring to. Hey Noob, how you doing, mate? Kevin says, I was surprised Triple H didn't announce War Games last Friday. Me too. I'd imagine they're getting Saudi Arabia out of the way first. Spider-Boss says, so if I got it, WWE would be copying pasting the 2012-2013 booking of Cena, using it with Cody. Wouldn't surprise me if Cody wins the Rumble again. It would surprise me, as I don't think that's necessary or particularly helpful. I do think someone else should win the Rumble on the Raw side, ideally someone like Gunther. Rizal says, are there any plans for a women's War Games? It seems like they might not be doing it. Fightful said they only heard plans for the men's one. That I'm not sure on at this point in time. I was reporting a few months ago that War Games was happening. I reported recently, as in the last couple of weeks, that Judgment Day is a surefire hit to be involved. But at the moment, there are not really factions of women outside of Damage Control, one member of which will not be fully cleared, and Asuka, Charlotte, and Bianca Belair. What I would say is that it might be worth considering, if we're going 3 versus 3 versus 3 for the men, that we may go 3 versus 3 versus 3 for the women. Some combination of, for example, Rhea Ripley, Nia Jax, and Shayna Baszler would certainly be a very destructive force. Steve says, hey Tom, with Gunther a likely favourite to win the Rumble, how soon would you anticipate him dropping the IC title? Is Drew the top threat? I wouldn't anticipate him dropping the IC title, and that makes it all the more surprising that he wins the Royal Rumble. The other Mike says, what up Tom, is there a main roster PLE planned for December, or is Survivor Series the last PLE before Royal Rumble? I'm not sure on that one. The WWE keep this one particularly cagey. I'm waiting to see how it plays out. Rob says, happy for Randy Orton returning, fans miss him and he's going to get a massive pop. That is a report by Fightful. Dan says, good evening Tom, welcome Eve Wrestling. And KJ says, what's up Tom, thank you guys for clarifying what out of sync and what level. Leon says it was 9, Michael's synced to 5, and a few saying 2156 or 957, etc. Essentially, when I click go live on Twitch, which is about 5 minutes beforehand, that's my tradition, it does say to YouTube, oh, he's live, you must be waiting for him. So it does prompt him. Marcel says, hi Tom and chat, how are you? Doing well, thank you Marcel. Spider-Boss says, do you see Io Sky retaining her title against Charlotte on SmackDown? Yep. KJ says, do you think Aldis could be used as a GM to get over with fans and then end up in the ring? That is exactly what I expect is happening. He's a great talker. You might as well use that. Roger says, I hope Charlotte beats Jade Cargill. I don't even know if they're wrestling per se. KJ says he got a big pop when he shot on Dom. Also, what a spit it was for him to be in between Roman and Cody. Vegeta says, I hope Aldis wrestles by Mania. We'll see. NYC said, Jade Cargill filed to trademark her name a few days ago via House of Wrestling. Thank you very much for sourcing. She did indeed. Razar says, was the Kevin Owens trade not planned when they moved Jay? I thought it would have been Cody. It was not planned when Jey Uso was moved. They were still deciding and only really decided on Kevin Owens before the tag team championship win for Cody and Jay. Hector says, storyline wise, I think KO moving to SmackDown makes sense because Cody would just be like, you wanted to be away from Jay, well, I made that happen permanently. For me, that will increase the suspicion that Sami Zayn has for Jey Uso, and I suspect Sami Zayn versus Jey Uso may come round again with a heel turn for Sami. Spider-Boss says, I only hope once Randy Orton returns, he delivers an RKO to Rhea. We'll see how that plays out, but he is the one person who would be allowed to. Clyde says, it's push-up and spoiler warning time. As always, hope all is well, Tom in the chat. Cheers to Raw tonight. Steve says, how does Nick Aldis look more jacked with a suit on? He's such a wide specimen. That's a phrase. It's an interesting phrase, that. And Richard says, hi, Tom, how are you? And everyone doing well. Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much for joining us. Our first piece of news would be all of this swirling around Vince McMahon and his removal from creative. And before I jump into it, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions to get this ball rolling. Firstly, do you miss having Vince McMahon involved in creative? There'll be a follow-up, but give me this answer, pardon me, first. This is the news that Triple H is fully in charge of creative, has been knighted by WWE Ari Emanuel, so above WWE at Endeavour and TKO, and Vince McMahon has been removed from creative entirely. Now, as I have said previously, this is not as simple as saying, well, Vince has just been removed. He hasn't just been removed. Vince has not been in charge of creative since around WrestleMania time. The Raw after WrestleMania, he was too involved, and as I reported at that time, the bad press which followed him because of that, caused some concerns with Ari Emanuel. This, of course, led to a moment when Ari Emanuel reined him in and said, look, this is what's happening. You're causing a scene, you're giving us bad press, you're destabilizing the stock. You need to calm down. That is when Vince McMahon essentially said, I will row back and I will not be as involved as I was. That was just after WrestleMania. The fact that this is coming out now, I find very interesting because of primarily where it's coming out from. PWInsider typically are quite close to the Performance Center, and by such are quite close to some of the wrestlers there. Not necessarily head office, so it's interesting seeing the sourcing that they've got when it comes to that particular element. Now, Triple H has been directly overseeing creative for more than a year, since last year's SummerSlam. Vince McMahon did get involved around WrestleMania time, particularly to try and protect Bray Wyatt, which was a project of his. I won't go into any more on that, but I've mentioned it before. And a number of other things, such as, for example, not being a big fan of Cody winning the match. There was a discussion about it. Vince McMahon didn't necessarily win, but a change was made that meant that Cody was not going to be winning it. Now, when it comes to Roman and the Bloodline, that's always been Vince McMahon's baby, and he in fact was still writing that. There are suspicions, non-confirmed, there are suspicions that he was actually writing it the entire time, including the build to this year's WrestleMania and onwards, that he never actually stopped writing it, either because he had written so far ahead, or because he was still directly involved and overseeing and discussing with Triple H. There are suspicions of that, once again, not currently confirmed. There are a number of areas in which Vince McMahon will be missed, I feel. There are very strong storylines that he's put together. Sami Zayn as part of the Bloodline was a Vince McMahon story. Cody Rhodes winning the Rumble and taking on Roman was a Vince McMahon story. Jey Uso was a Vince McMahon story. Dominic and Rey Mysterio was a Vince McMahon story. There's more. For example, Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte was not, but when you look at Becky Lynch versus Bianca, which has happened recently, that was. So there's a lot in which he's been directly involved in a very positive manner. This included the title win for Liv Morgan as another example. So there are a number of storylines in which a lot of fans would be happy to see more of Vince McMahon, but the removal of him from that position happened just after WrestleMania. Vince McMahon is now focused on what is his actual job. Creative has never been, since stepping back from the WWE well before the sale, his actual job. His job was to oversee WWE and UFC in a way that will grow their brand and increase their overall income. That's his job. That is what he is focused on. At this point, Vince McMahon has not been involved in creative since just after WrestleMania. So I don't know why, 6 months later, we're suddenly hearing he's been removed when he wasn't there to begin with. Spider-Boss says, I loved how Nick Aldis roasted Dominic on SmackDown. And this is as regards Vince McMahon. Leon says, absolutely not, as in will not be missed. NYC says no. Brad says, nope, not even one little bit. Carmelina says, when do you think Jimmy and Jay will be in the ring together? Very, very soon. In fact, I would be surprised if it wasn't in the next couple of weeks. Marcel says no. NYC says no again. Roger says, what did you think of all the fuss about Tony Khan tweets about NXT versus AEW? I'm not going to get back into that, Roger. I covered it in quite some length on Friday. I suggest you check that out because I'm very happy with what we explained there. But at this point, I just wish him well and hope that he can calm down a little bit. That says, nope. Clyde says, no. Triple H all the way. Richard says, no, I don't. Vince's storyline has been boring before his retirement. Vegeta says, I can't wait to see Gargano as IC champion. You must be seeing the future because I don't see that one happening. Zane says, what did you think of The Undertaker on NXT? Didn't watch it because why would I? Sean says, hello, Tom. Hello, Sean. Roger says, what do you think has the best storylines, Raw or SmackDown or NXT? Hard to say. Main reason for that being that I don't religiously watch NXT and thus can't answer completely. I will take your word for that, David. I've not seen much of their work. Hector says, I think that as long as Vince stays off of TV and makes minimal suggestions toward creative, then I'm okay. Because hate or love Vince, his input could be somewhat beneficiary towards Triple H's growth as a booker. Triple H ultimately did learn from Vince McMahon. So let's ask the follow-up question. And I'm interested in this because you've got decades to go over. What is the single best storyline that Vince McMahon has ever overseen? You've essentially got until Triple H took over. What is the single best storyline that Vince McMahon ever wrote? Spider-Boss says, I wish Triple H would give more time to the women's division. Any Judgment Day segments gets more TV time than the women's division. To be fair, having Rhea Ripley directly involved as she is a huge part of the Raw women's division is a large part of that. And Michael says Vince can go all together. NYC says Rey Mysterio would love a hair versus mask match against Dominic Mysterio via Fightful. That would, of course, be a balding Dominic at the end of it. By all means, make a prediction, Vegeta. I don't see it. Brad suggests Vince versus Austin, which I can see is already popping up. Spider-Boss says, apart from Sammy and the Bloodline, I won't miss Vince. Triple H isn't the best booker, to be clear. Fair enough. I do think now that the story has come out that, it's just Triple H, what we're going to see is a bit less positivity around Triple H. Because anything that was good was Triple H. Anything that was bad, oh well, that's Vince's fault. So I'll be interested to see how that plays out going forwards. Bailey says the best, Steve Austin versus Mr. McMahon. Kevin says for WrestleMania 39, Mr. McMahon booking the best storyline, but Mr. McMahon, Charlotte versus Rhea, and Bianca Belair versus Asuka was not good storyline. Charlotte versus Rhea was not Vince McMahon. Hector says Daniel Bryan's storyline for the title at Mania for my money. I would imagine that was WrestleMania 30 and not Kofi Mania. Alex says, hey Tom, is it true that Triple H wants to bring Uncle Howdy in the Firefly Funhouse? Nope. Nope. There's a push for it from fans. It could be that Triple H is convinced to do so. He ain't trying to make it happen. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. Not often I get told I got a great question. Usually I'm saying that to you guys because we get very good questions here. Backwards says Evolution. Interesting. Vegeta says Undertaker and Kane. Daz says HBK versus Vince Mania 22, I think. Is that the one with God? Is that God? 23 Fresh says, will the WWE ever bring back the New Year's Day pay-per-view? Probably not. Leon says Vince Stone Cold. Alex suggests the best story is, and then lists two. Alex, you got to pick one. Give me one. Bazar says Triple H seems to only push people who are top-level wrestlers and doesn't seem to give chances to people who don't meet that. I mean, I don't agree with that in any way, shape or form. Cameron Grimes has been on TV a few times recently. He's not what is considered a top-level wrestler. There's plenty of women's wrestlers as well. Tegan Knox just got a women's championship shot. Zelina Vega is still being featured quite strongly as well. You're seeing a lot of Austin Theory and Grayson Waller at the moment. LA Knight right now is getting a push towards the biggest championship in the game. So I don't agree with that at all, personally. Don't agree with that at all. Spider-Boss says, I don't see fans now. They don't. I want to see fans now that they don't have Vince to blame. A very fair point. KJ says, I got your point, but saying you wish the women got more TV time, then follow up with saying Judgment Day gets more TV time. Rhea is in the women's division, but I get your point. Fair. Spider-Boss says, the summer of the role models in 2020. Kervin says, people can say no, Mr. McMahon, but remember, Mr. McMahon was the reason everybody still watched WWE product to this day. Not a lot of people, I'd imagine there was a follow-up at some point, but you ran out of text room. Clyde said, with the exception of Vince versus Austin, I would say The Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels and Triple H, WrestleMania 3-year storyline. 4-year, I do believe. 3 years for WrestleManias. Yes, you're right. Alex goes with Kofi Mania at WrestleMania 35. Richard says, I can't pick. Vince versus Stone Cold was amazing. As I run through these, the question we are answering is, what is the best storyline that Vince McMahon ever put together? While I'm doing so, we do have at the moment 37 likes. 20 minutes in, 3 more will get us to 40. I'd be very appreciative if you could get us over that line. 3 more to get us to 40. Please consider doing so. Chris says, I got to go with Hogan versus Savage. That year-long build between 4 and 5, from them becoming best friends to becoming bitter enemies through Macho Man's insane jealousy and a slow burn throughout the year that built to Savage finally turning on Hogan was just fantastic. Alex says, did WWE nix or abandon the Shotzi versus Bayley feud? Shotzi's taking a little bit of time off for good reasons, to my knowledge. Eric says the best story was Daniel Bryan winning at Mania. King Azza says, will Roman be in War Games? I don't have an answer for you, unfortunately. Dane says, Odyssey Jones never gets a chance on Raw or SmackDown. Odyssey Jones is one guy, and they really haven't worked out what to do with him yet. There, to my knowledge, has not been any plans at the moment to have him feature on Raw or SmackDown as of yet. Daniela says, Cedric Alexander battled well versus Bronson Reed a few weeks ago. Hopefully he's featured on Raw more. Well, if fans get behind him, that should happen. Bailey says, Tom, when do you think Vince gives up to Shane as his successor? Doesn't. That's not how that works anymore. There is no successor. It's a job. He's no longer owning the company. Spider-Boss says, I think the closest thing to fans criticising Triple H was when the Becky versus Trish match got cut from SummerSlam this year. I will say that people still tried to blame Vince McMahon for that. It wasn't the best moment for them. NYC says, Tony Khan should challenge Vince to a fight. Okay. Richard says, can I pick The Undertaker? This is a storyline? Hell yeah. King Azza says, the best story is Kofi Mania or, and then lists the second one. Nope, just one. Just one story. Sean says, Ray said today in an interview with Ariel Helwani that last-minute changes happened way more than just at the night after WrestleMania. Yes, and that's not just Vince McMahon who does that. It's Triple H who decided, late in the day, that Kevin Owens would be moving over. It's not just Vince McMahon who does it. Alyssa says, where does Jimmy go? He's still on SmackDown. Not sure we're going for that. Dan says, depends on the parameters of how we judge the best. I'd have to go by financially, in which case I'd say Austin versus McMahon, because of the way it boosted the business as a whole, then on NWO, then Bloodline. So I'm going to have to ask a question here. Because you're talking about Vince McMahon and you've mentioned NWO. Do you mean the WWE NWO that was written by Vince? Or do you mean the WCW NWO, in which case I do have to ask a question of you. Razar says, the Eddie versus Ray storyline was what got me into wrestling, so that's my biased opinion as a best storyline. Guys, this is biased. Be biased. That's what I'm asking for. I'm asking for a subjective opinion. Noob says, Asuka's performance on NXT is good. Last week, however, I would like to see her work NXT and SmackDown. You will not be getting your wish. Michael says, Austin versus Vince McMahon was always my favourite. Oh, Bailey says, Tom, the question was when Vince finally gave up on Shane in the past. Not now. He didn't. He didn't. Sean says, Lacey was asked about her departure from WWE. She answered by saying the WWE lifestyle wasn't for her. Very respectful and leaves doors open. Which is always a good thing. Roger says, Brock Lesnar destroying Kofi Kingston in 7 seconds was my favourite storyline. Yes, Dan, it was specifically the best Vince McMahon storyline. Steve says, what's Carlito's role ceiling? MVP. And I don't mean like most valuable player. I mean Vontavious Porter? The wrestler MVP. Adam, you're asking questions and making statements that I'm not wanting to talk about right now. That's it. There are times when I'm not going to discuss certain things. And those happen to be certain things that you do like to talk about. It's not you per se. It's just that the things you like to talk about, unfortunately, right now, I do not want to talk about. Spider-Boss says the rise to the top of Eddie Guerrero in his second run in WWE was my favourite. Hector says, hey Tom, what's your opinion on Ari Emanuel saying they're open to moving Raw away from Monday? Did he say that? Did he say that? Can you give me a source on that, Hector? Was there an interview that I missed? King Arthur says, what's your favourite Roman Reigns match in recent times? Mine was versus Cody at WrestleMania 39. Sami Zayn, Elimination Chamber. People genuinely believed it. People genuinely believed it. I didn't, but I wish I did. And then there was a moment where I did, which tells me it was very, very good. And after that, it's been kind of dull. 23 Fresh says, could you ever see the WWE bringing back the NWO? No, because Judgment Day is basically NWO at the minute. Vegeta says, Randy Orton versus Taker is what hooked me. Alyssa says, where does Jimmy go when the bloodline ends? Probably back to the bloodline again. Richard says, Rhea's been champion for months and barely been in a feud or part of the women's division, which is simply not true. She's been in several feuds. Firstly, you consider the Zelina Vega feud, the Natalya feud. We're now in a Nia Jax, also Shayna Baszler, also Raquel Rodriguez feud. There's been a Raquel Rodriguez feud going for quite a few months. So there's quite a few feuds. You can't say that she's barely been in a feud. That's just not true. Thank you, Brad. Appreciate that. Roger says, what was the greatest return in the history of WWE? I kind of still think Triple H in 2001, but, 2002, I should say. But I'm a mark. Dimitar says, personal favourites are Austin versus Vince and the rise of the man. Q43 says, hello, Tom. Is Omos currently on creative hiatus? Yes, he is. And he says, Austin versus McMahon. It saved the WWE, in my opinion. Bailey says, if we asked what was the worst Vince storyline, it would fill up the rest of the chat. Let's save that for now. Don't answer that question. Let's do a bit more news. Then we'll talk about that. Steve says, speaking of MVP, where's he been? Creative hiatus. Spider-Boss says, with Becky being an NXT DC Dominic losing the North American title for good? Eventually, yes. But I doubt that surprises you. Carmelina says, will Jay and Jimmy ever get back together as a tag team? I do not have a crystal ball. Alyssa says, do you see a title change on Raw tonight? No. David suggests Seth Rollins turning on the feud. Dan says, I meant the WCW NWO, which also then bled into New Japan, where it also did Mahousi business. To my knowledge, it actually originated in Japan as LIJ, to be fair, but I don't know if I'm actually following correctly there. So it was interesting seeing it originate, leave, and then come back again as a very different entity. I didn't hate Raw Underground NYC. I think it gave a lot of wrestlers an opportunity to do something different, and it actually stood out, but they didn't use it particularly well. It's very good for the Hurt business. Nobody's asking about Nick Aldis. It was one of the first questions I was asked. By all means, zip back to the beginning and get my thoughts. Michael says, or another one of my favourites, Jericho and KO being best friends of 2016-2017, which I think is very, very fair. Vegeta says, LA Knight is a former NWA wrestler as well. Quite a few are. Next up, Logan Paul has laid out a challenge for Rey Mysterio. He will be face-to-face with Rey Mysterio at this week's upcoming SmackDown. There is a very quickly growing school of thought in the creative team that Logan Paul should be getting the United States Championship. Now, with the United States Championship, he could then do what Bad Bunny did with the 24/7 Championship, carry that hither and yon to basically highlight the WWE. He would be appearing in podcasts, particularly his Impulsive podcast, holding it, and other YouTube events and boxing events. They want to put a championship on him so that he can rep the WWE. This is a Vince McMahon concept, but apparently Triple H is kind of behind the idea. It would of course be very good advertising. As regards Rey Mysterio, this would mean him losing the championship, but I do think Logan Paul is one of those that would actually be a very good champion, but it would be a brief championship run, given that he is not there, many dates. This is a big thing that would prevent him from winning the championship. He would win it, go away for a couple of months, and then come back and lose it. So it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. King Azza says, who's a better heel, Triple H or Hollywood Rock? Triple H in everywhere. Spider-Boss says, I loved when Vince gave a long title reign to Mercedes/Sasha. Zane says, what was Triple H's best storyline? More on that. I'm not going to discuss that individual one at this point in time. I'm planning to get to that after my next piece of news. 23 Fresh says, could you see CM Punk signing with NWA or Impact Wrestling? No. Hector, thank you very kindly, bringing the exact sourcing in. Ari Emanuel spoke recently at the Bloomberg Screen Time Conference, and House of Wrestling transcribed the following quote: you want us Thursday night, you want us Tuesday, I don't have any of those scheduling issues. That churn issue, because we're the full year, is so much different than any other sport because then people churn out. That is not necessarily just about Monday Night Raw. Daniela says, Tom, in your opinion, was a Hurt business booked well in the COVID era? Yes. Brad says Logan Paul for the win. Leon says the thoughts of having two part-time champions on the same brand scares me. Well, Roman will be back for the vast majority of the next few months. I like the list, yes, Roger. Dan says, it was heavily inspired from many years prior, but I mean it's NWO, which then had the NJPW NWO, which had my favouring of Keiji Muto fighting the NWO whilst his alter ego Muta was in the NWO. I knew Muta was in the NWO, but I did not know about that. That sounds amazing. Chris says, let's say Logan Paul does win. Does this open the door for someone like LA Knight or Santos Escobar to challenge and take the US title from Logan Paul? Yes, it does. I wouldn't be too surprised, as Alyssa just suggested, to see Logan Paul defending at WrestleMania against someone like LA Knight to give him an opportunity to pick up that win. 23 says, what was the best storyline in the COVID era? Well, again, we'll get to that. By all means, everyone, dive in. Dive in with your responses. Dan says, Austin versus McMahon, NWO and then Bloodline of wrestling overall. Austin versus McMahon and then Bloodline for just Vince. Alyssa says, do Logan Paul versus LA Knight for 40. Wrestler fan says, will Roman be a Survivor Series? We'll see how that plays out. And Daniela says, what led to the Hurt Business separating and falling apart? They were told to by creative. The next piece of news, before we get to talking about Triple H and his storylines, Jade Cargill. So the WWE is currently undecided as to what to do with Jade Cargill from the off. They are intending to give her a strong push, but they have not yet decided whether that would be on Raw, SmackDown, or NXT. There is plenty more coming with to decide what is actually going to be happening, but they're making a point of having her appear on all of the different shows to gauge fan reaction and to make it clear that she's going to be a big deal. They're not oversaturating her by having too much of her. In fact, honestly, after watching Fastlane, I expected to see more of Jade Cargill after she appeared in the pre-show. We didn't see that. So it took a little time for us to get to a point where we were seeing quite a lot of her, and I don't think we've seen too much at this point in time. That's good. But there is also a reason why people like Rhea Ripley, who are very good on social media, are connecting now with Jade Cargill. They want the feud. It's very clear and being made very clear backstage in WWE that whoever does get the first feud with Jade Cargill will be pushed pretty hard because of it, even if they wouldn't necessarily pick up the win. Rhea Ripley wants that association. Charlotte Flair wants that association. In fact, a number of women's wrestlers have requested the first feud with Jade Cargill, and it is meaning that there are a plethora of options available for Jade Cargill. A plethora of options that we will see come into play over the next few weeks. The WWE is not yet decided, but they will come to it very soon, and they do have a number of easily available options. So, as I've gone over that piece of news, let's talk about Triple H then. We've talked about Vince McMahon's best storyline, and he did have decades of opportunity to do so. Triple H has only had just over 1 year so far, though he did also have NXT and a number of years to do so, with, let's just say, less eyes, less drawing power, etc. So, factoring in NXT, what is the best storyline that Triple H has ever written? I have noted that we now have a troll who's stating that Triple H was going to announce War Games. Now, I did tweet out, which I don't report on Twitter, as you guys know. I did tweet out that Triple H, during tonight's SmackDown, and then a gif of William Regal saying, War Games. Again, not everything I say is a report, because Twitter is not spoiler warning. I make it very clear when I'm having fun, when I'm reporting. That is not a case of me reporting on Twitter. I don't report on Twitter. But hey, as I can see plenty of people doing in the chat, remember, hi troll and then bye troll, because bless them, the more they talk, the more it helps my algorithm, but ultimately they have no purpose in life, so why would I care about what they have to say? We currently have 44 likes and 79 viewers. One more like gets us up to 45, so please do consider being the one. Michael says, best of the COVID era was the golden role models. They really did hold the show together, and I really enjoyed their time together. It was some of the best work of both of them. I particularly enjoyed the matches they both had with Bayley. I very much enjoyed that. Leon says, Rey Mysterio's US title reign hasn't hit at all. Have it main event SmackDown, booking major feuds involving the title, make it feel important, which I do agree with, and Logan Paul certainly will do that. Sean says, do you think Cena is done after Crown Jewel, or does he stick around for War Games? Personally, I don't see him staying after Crown Jewel. He has to get back to work. King Azza says, is Roman going to take a break after WrestleMania if he loses? Far too soon to say whether that's going to happen, but he does have strategic breaks over the course of the year. No, honestly, Roger, I never really got the broken Matt Hardy storyline. It wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. Noob says, I get the feeling Charlotte Flair is getting replaced by Jade Cargill. That's not happening. Pete says, everyone say hi to the troll and then bye. Thank you, Pete. I think I'm going to sneeze. Am I going to sneeze? I think I'm going to sneeze. I'm going to sneeze. Sorry, guys. King Azza says, the Bloodline is the best storyline from Triple H. Rosal says, I'm really excited to see what they do with Jade. I think she'll end up on Raw. Spider-Boss says, the WWE wrestlers aren't allowed to say AEW. That's not true. WWE wrestlers, by and large, can say whatever they want. Hector says, Ari Emanuel also mentioned not only the rights deals for Raw coming up, but also UFC. If Vince is in negotiation for both, which he is, since that's his job, I wonder if NBC Universal would dip their hand in the UFC business. He's not necessarily trying to sell them as a package deal. They are supposed to be independent, and the intention seems to be to try and get them onto different platforms to try and spread the word, essentially. But yes, Vince McMahon is directly involved in that. And it's interesting seeing a lot of talk right now, particularly from Wrestling Observer, about what the WWE would do if they got the top level deal, and stating that they haven't made as much money from the increase as they were looking for. Brad suggests Ciampa versus Gargano. I feel that went too long and kept going back to the well too often, but I do think it was one of the best storylines at the beginning. Tommaso Ciampa coming down the aisle to the chants that he came down to and no music. Glorious. Ryan says, when NXT took over Survivor Series, if that counts, Triple H was heavily involved in the writing of that, so yes, it does. Michael says, according to BWE, Becky Lynch will find herself in front of the new acquisition. He's suggesting Becky goes against Jade. It's not quite what he's suggesting, though. I do just want to reiterate what you said there. She'll find herself in front of the new acquisition. Charlotte Flair found herself in front of the new acquisition. You might suggest that if you're a big name in the women's division, you might find yourself in front of the new acquisition. I don't think that's quite as suggestive as it comes across. Dan making a very good point. I have no idea what he's written and what he hasn't. Sean says DIY versus the Revival. Richard says Jade Cargill at the start and has attitude for days, but in wrestling ability are not at that level for a match with Rhea and Charlotte. To be clear, right now, as we speak, she is spending a lot of time at the Performance Center, flying out for Raw and for SmackDown, but going back to the Performance Center to work with a number of trainers. She's done a few sessions with Charlotte and a few sessions with Becky Lynch. Adam and Marcel both given a high troll and a bye troll. Spider-Boss says best storyline under Triple H is Gunter's IC title reign. The actual victory for the IC title was a Vince McMahon story. Since then, it's been all Triple H. Marcel is the one. Richard says the beginning of the end of the Divas division, Asuka's unbeaten run. Kevin says if I'm booking Jade Cargill every week, Jade Cargill versus Jobber. Certainly could be a way to build her up. Bailey says best Triple H storyline, the effective use of Bad Bunny. Very fair point, particularly in Puerto Rico. Dan says, I know that Shawn Michaels' booking is regularly met with eye rolls. Unfortunately so, yes, particularly the 2.0. Spider-Boss says, do you see Ava Raine joining the Bloodline? There's a long way to go. Long way to go. Welcome, Blair. Says, who is Bret Hart's toughest opponent? Personally, Blair, I will 100% go for Shawn Michaels. My favourite wrestling match of all time is the WrestleMania 12 main event. Might be because of what was going on in real life, and, you know, how that followed up. But yeah, I really like that one. Razar says, not going to lie, I've been very disappointed with Triple H on the storyline department. Like, Io vs Asuka was a dream match and it barely had a story building to it. We got no promos or segments. Clyde says, DIY, Dakota Kai's heel turn in the women's War Game match was a great moment. Dom says, Ciampa and Gargano. Oh, and don't forget to hit the like button. We're on 47 likes now. 3 more gets us to 50. Vegeta says, Kervin, her versus Jobbers was all she was doing before. She's here to feud with actual stars, but it could be a build-up and well worth it. Wrestler fan says, is Vince now out of creative completely? He has been since just after WrestleMania. Michael says, best NXT storyline, Sasha versus Bayley. 23 says, did you like the Invasion storyline? I think it could have been a lot more, but I do think they did the best with what they could. A lot of the big stars it simply wasn't possible to get, and some people, Triple H for example, were injured. Michael says, Sami and KO was another one of my favourite Triple H NXT storylines. Daniela says, Ricochet and Aleister Black as a tag team was brilliant. Clyde says, Bayley's ascension ending with her win in that ladder match. King Arthur says, are WWE turning Belair into the next John Cena? Not necessarily, but if that's what you read. Carlos, I call trolls trolls. You're a troll. Spider-Boss says, I never got what happened with the push for Gigi Dolan in NXT. Neither did I, to be completely honest with you. Dan says, high five for the Iron Main WrestleMania 12 match. So polarising, but the pacing and structure is tremendous. I wholeheartedly agree. It just continues to build. It starts off very slow, but it builds and builds and builds. I loved it. Brad says, my favourite wrestling match too. 23 Fresh says, was the Survivor Series in 97 a work? No. Then he says, did The Rock train his daughter to wrestle? No. Eric says, my favourite Triple H storyline was Nikki's Got a Secret. Fair. Hector says, what if the new acquisition, a certain pirate princess, thought I'll pop for that more than Jade, but I see it being Jade even though I'd like to be wrong. Well, if it is, then clearly they're right, even if they didn't know it. Blair says, who is the next AEW star to jump ship? That would potentially be tampering if the WWE were in contact with anyone. Dan says, it's basically put together as 4 50-minute matches where each follow one another in the story, then connect at the end. Wonderful stuff. Bret Hart was known to put together his matches in that manner, and he did stay with him for his entire career. Alyssa is asking, do you think The Rock versus Roman Reigns will ever happen? Do you see it happening? Now, as you guys know, for the last 5 years, whenever a report comes out, usually from the Wrestling Observer, that The Rock is going to be wrestling Roman Reigns at WrestleMania, 3 years. For the last 3 years, whenever that report comes out, you guys come here and I say, The Rock is not booked to face Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. And I get a few people saying, oh, he is, he definitely is, it's going to happen. A couple of weeks later, also the Wrestling Observer come out and say, no, it's not happening. So they create a rumour, everyone links back to the rumour, they then rumour kill their own rumour. This happens more than you'd think. My next video might actually just be on reports of The Rock from the Wrestling Observer, but I digress. When it comes to The Rock, once again, he's not booked to face Roman at WrestleMania. It's very nice seeing it come out from Sports Illustrated today, but as I say, I've been mentioning it for years now. Every year, the Wrestling Observer says it's going to be The Rock. I say it's not going to be The Rock. The Wrestling Observer then says it's not going to be The Rock. And then it isn't The Rock. It's that simple. So, the report is from Sports Illustrated that The Rock will not be facing Roman Reigns at WrestleMania. Funnily enough, it comes out after SmackDown when Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes had a stare down. And of course, this is after a SmackDown where The Rock appeared and Roman Reigns did not. For me, it's very telling who they put Roman Reigns opposite, and it's not The Rock. Roger says, did you like the storyline of Shane McMahon buying WCW? It was alright. Again, I feel they did the best of what they could. It wasn't very good though. Vegeta says, Undisputed Era is Triple H's best work. He got 4 bland guys over. You wash your mouth out. You wash your mouth out. I love Kyle O'Reilly. I love him to the bottom of my goddamn black heart. I am actually more of a fan of Kyle O'Reilly than I am of Adam Cole. And I love Adam Cole. That's all I will say. Eric suggests Asuka's undefeated NXT streak and her long NXT Women's Championship reign. Daniela says, is there any possibility that Ricochet and Cedric come back together as a team, or Ricochet will just wait for Braun to come back to fight in the tag division? They're trying to think of things that he can use and he can do without being involved in the tag division and waiting. King Azza, my favourite feud of all time continues to be Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels. Wiggly says, what's WWE's plans for Nick Aldis? Will he ever be world champ ever? Mate, that's... everything's on the table. Someone doesn't appear in WWE and immediately I'm told, okay, on the 27th of April 2026 they're going to win the top championship. That's not how that works, even slightly. Brad says about the reports of The Rock, we laugh. Rizal says, is Trish done with WWE or do they plan on using her again? It's up to her. There is not currently any storylines involving Trish Stratus, but they are open to the idea. Happy Monday, Madsen. Says, happy Monday, Tom. Hope you are well. Hope you're good and well. Kevin says, Becky Lynch versus Nia Jax need to happen. The storyline needs to be like this. Without me, you would never be famous. Becky. There's options for it. Razar says, I think this year was the best chance for the Rock match with the strikes happening, so I really think the Rock might not wrestle again. Vegeta thinks Trish is probably done. In my opinion, Triple H doesn't want to use part-time legends. He's the one who brought Trish back. 23 Fresh says, how about the Val Venis storylines? Now, I liked The Good Father. That's all I'll say. Brad says all 4 members of Undisputed Era are great. Madsen says the era was pure gold in NXT. I was so sad all of them got released and haven't been and weren't on the main roster. Literally the second Adam Cole went, I reported the Undisputed Era will reunite in AEW, and that is exactly what happened. Good evening, Bismo. Nice to see you. Alyssa says, who faces Seth Rollins at WrestleMania 40? No idea. H feud. The Rock. Cut. Brighter Sensor really did. Wiggly says, Sting is coming to FTLOW next year. Get this, in red face paint. Why? Why? Oh, thank you guys. We do seem to have a brief freeze. Hopefully we're back now. Thank you, Michael, for the clarification. It looks like it was an internet issue. But we seem to be back. Can you let me know if we are back at this point, please? I am still showing a slight error and there may be buffering. I have gone through my news, so I am planning to wrap up soon. I was hoping to get through a few questions, though. So, yes, thank you, guys. Thank you kindly. It wasn't you, Pete, don't you worry. Dan says, because money, which is not unfair. Thank you, guys. Daniela says, when Roderick Strong and Malcolm Bivens were in Diamond Mine, that group was so strong. Now with only Creed Brothers and Ivy Nile, it's a bit bland. To be clear, Roderick Strong had no intention of signing a new deal. I reported that at the time. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Razar. Then he says, did you like Writer Sense storyline? Yeah, it was different. Also, their theme was a banger. Daniela says, we are back. No, Dan, I'm actually with BT, and a pretty good one at that. So it's very... Every now and then I do get a problem. No sound on Twitch. Okay, this is a known problem and a known bug. Unfortunately, so I'll have no sound on Twitch, but you may need to pop over to YouTube for the finish. Have I gone like Chipmunk? Because that happens sometimes as well. Right. What I will say, though, is that is all of the news that I've got. So it actually came in a decent time. I want to say thank you for all of the different questions and answers that we got. I really enjoyed that. I really did enjoy that. And it does make for such a lively show. We'll have to do more of these, which is more involved in questions and answers. One thing I do want to touch on, the video about Saudi Arabia. Now, on Sunday, I released another one of my videos with a lot of research as to clickbait, journalism, and the like. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. The one on the WWE sold to Saudi Arabia is what I did this Sunday, and it's gone very, very well. What I will say is that one of the videos I made a while ago has gone kablooey, and is my new most seen video on YouTube. The video about CM Punk wanting a WWE return from 2 weeks ago has now reached 21,218 views. 21,218. A new record. And over 500 likes. I just want to say a thank you to everyone who's been involved in that. We're also at a new record of 5,312 subscribers. Yes, it does, KJ. It's one of the reasons I'm asking more questions and trying to get into the habit, but I also want to get through the news as well. So, questions I feel are very good. It helps me get to know you guys. What I have pitched to Nick Barbati, as you know, Nick is my colleague for the PWTorch, Nick and Tom's Intercontinental Adventure. I've had an idea. It's old-fashioned, very old-fashioned, and pretty much a pure engagement farm. It would be a tier list of WWE wrestlers. So, that'll be controversial. You guys will disagree with most of what we say. We will disagree vehemently on a lot of them, and I'm excited for that. So if anyone else wants to see a live tier list where you guys can get involved and maybe we can get a vote going about some of these results, I want to do that. I think it'd be very fun. I think it'd be very long, and I think it would be pure engagement farming that will really massively help the growth of the channel. So let me know if you're interested in that. Marcel says, Zero News says, and I stopped reading. Bismarck says, will pigs fly before we see Punk back in WWE? I have said previously, no interest in WWE and CM Punk. It was very fun watching that become the known narrative. BM likes it. Daniela likes it. Good to see. Until Friday then, when we have another spoiler warning, you'll still see me in shorts, but for now, I've been Tom Colohue, you've been fantastic, and I'll see you all very soon.